2006 and in 2011, I voted against the USA Patriot Act. I voted against that legislation because I believe that in a democratic and constitutional form of government that we can effectively combat terrorism without sacrificing the civil liberties and the constitutional protections which make us a free country. The President has said that he welcomes a debate on this issue, and I agree with him. There should be a debate, and the debate should center on whether the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is still relevant. If it is, let's abide by it. If it isn't, let us not be hypocrites, and let us acknowledge that we live in a society, in a nation, in which our freedom and liberty have been severely compromised. But let us not pretend that the protections that the Fourth Amendment guarantees exist when, in fact, they do not exist. Here is what the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution states, and I quote, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized." End of quote. That is the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Now let us talk about what we learned in the last week about the National Security Agency's activities. We learned that it is likely that virtually every phone call made by every American is being collected and stored by the United States government. The time that you made that phone call, where you made that phone call, how long you were on the phone, and to whom you made that phone call is now part of the record of the United States government. Every husband calling a wife, every businessman making a deal, every elected official talking to a constituent, every candidate talking to a campaign manager, every doctor talking to a patient, every lawyer talking to a client, every journalist tracking a story. All of that information and more is now on file with the United States government. What is even more alarming is that it is not just the government officials who have access to that information. It turns out that it is private contractors like Booz Allen and, I assume, many other contractors. A few weeks ago, Madam President, you'll recall that there was a huge uproar in the media, including front-page stories that the Obama administration was tracking the phone calls made by reporters from the Associated Press. Big deal. Everybody was really concerned about that. While not listening to the calls, they learned who the reporters were speaking to, how long they were speaking, and where the reporters were located. Well, guess what? It turns out that what the Obama administration was doing to the AP is nothing unusual. This appears to be exactly what the government has the capability to do to every single American. Furthermore, we have also recently learned that the government has the capability to monitor every website that we visit, every video that we see, and every item that we search for online. Madam President, everybody understands that terrorism is a serious issue and that the United States government and governments throughout the world must do everything that we can to protect our people. We do not want another 9/11. We do not want another bombing like the Boston Marathon. We do, however, want our government, intelligence agencies, and law enforcement authorities to be strong and effective in combating terrorism. But, Madam President, it is my very strong opinion that we can do that without living in an Orwellian world where the government and private corporations know every telephone call that we make, every website that we visit, every place that we go. Is that really the country that we want to be? And let us be clear, the technology for monitoring every aspect of our daily lives will only increase in years to come, as that technology becomes ever more sophisticated. Madam President, opposition to the current NSA policy is coming from across the political spectrum. Representative Jim Sensenbrenner, a conservative Republican from Wisconsin and one of the authors of the original Patriot Act, said in a Thursday letter to Attorney General Eric Holder that he is, quote, extremely troubled, end quote, by the National Security Agency's seizure of the phone records of millions of Verizon customers through a secret court ruling. He also said, and I quote, this is Jim Sensenbrenner, I do not believe the released FISA order is consistent with the requirements of the Patriot Act. How could the phone records of so many innocent Americans be relevant to an authorized investigation as required by the Act? Seizing phone records of millions of innocent people is excessive and un-American, is what Republican Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner said in a press release that accompanied his letter to the Attorney General. Madam President, it is clear to me that the United States Congress has got to take a very hard look at the USA Patriot Act and specifically Act Section 215. Bottom line is we must be strong and effective in combating terrorism. But it is absolutely my view that we can do that without undermining the constitutional rights that make us a free country. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to first thank the Senator from South Dakota for his indulgence for 5 minutes or so to do this, and the Senator from Indiana for yielding his time to me. We got a little bit out of order on the floor. But I really wanted to come before the night was out to speak about an incredible chance we have with respect to fixing our broken immigration system. Over the next few weeks, the Senate has a golden opportunity to do something great, to do something important, to do something that shows that Washington can actually work, that we're aligned to the priorities of the American people, that we can take on hard challenges and solve them. That's the opportunity before us, and I have to say a thank you to all of my colleagues that served in this so-called Gang of Eight and worked, I would say, not even in a bipartisan way, I would say in a nonpartisan way to fix problems that afflict our economy and our democracy throughout the country in different ways. And I particularly want to thank Senator John McCain and Senator Schumer for their leadership during good times, but particularly during the tough times during this negotiation. You know, a lot of people that I represent sometimes wonder whether Washington is just irretrievably broken, whether or not we can actually do something in the regular order instead of just in the middle of the night. And to them, I can come to the floor tonight and say, finally, we have a process that we can be proud of. We have a bipartisan bill, a dozen hearings on this issue, Madam President, almost a month between the introduction of the bill and the committee markup, 37 hours of consideration in the Senate Judiciary Committee, 300 amendments filed, 212 considered. I think 141 of these amendments from our colleagues were actually approved. Even some of the harshest critics of the bill have commended the open and transparent process, and I'm grateful to Chairman Leahy for his work and the members of the Judiciary Committee. In the coming weeks, many more amendments will be before this body. Voices on every side of the issue will continue to have the chance to be heard, which is the way democracy ought to work. And at the end of the day, we can't squander the greatest chance in a generation, in 25 years, to fix our broken immigration system. No one understands this better than the people of Colorado. The people that I represent, who, even though they don't think of themselves this way particularly, are a third Democratic, a third Republican, and a third Independent. From end to end, corner to corner of our great western state, people have said to me, Michael, when are these guys going to fix this broken immigration system? With agriculture on the West Slope in northern Colorado and on the Eastern Plains, it's a $40 billion impact to our state. We have great high tech in Colorado, people inventing the future as we stand here today in bioscience, aerospace, engineering, and a growing startup community. Colorado's high tech sector includes more than 10,000 companies. And my hope is that 5 years from now there'll be 10,000 more, and 5 years after that 10,000 more than that. And 150,000 workers today that produce almost $3 billion of exports each year, as well as a new patent office opening soon. We have a huge tourism industry. Hotels, restaurants, and the ski industry struggle to find the workers they need. The ski industry alone brings in 57 million visitors to the country each year, many of these people traveling to Colorado year after year after year. We have a growing Latino population. It's almost 21% of our state's population. In places like the Denver Public Schools, a place I had the privilege to work before I came to the Senate, over half our students are Latino. So that's why we set out several years ago to have a conversation in Colorado, in the rural parts of the state, in the urban parts of the state, with our high-tech community, with our agricultural community, saying, what needs to be done? We brought together business leaders, farmers, faith leaders, law enforcement, advocates and community leaders, and we said, Washington's broken. We can't wait for them to act. But what can we do here in Colorado? And we came up with 7 principles for immigration reform, which are now reflected in the legislation before us. And it turns out that actually, for once, we underestimated this place. That this place was willing to approach this work with the seriousness of purpose that Colorado citizens were. I want to tell, Madam President, one Colorado story to reflect this, and I assure my colleague from South Dakota I've just got a couple more minutes. But Wayne Mininger, an onion farmer from Greeley, Colorado. Wayne also represents onion farmers across the nation as head of the National Onion Association. Growing up on his father's farm in California's San Joaquin Valley, and now owning his own farm in Greeley, Colorado, he's witnessed farmers' struggles to find reliable labor his entire working life. The farmers he represents have long voiced their frustration with a visa system that results in serious delays hiring workers or not having enough labor altogether to harvest crops. They're not interested in the politics in the nation's capital. They're interested in running their farms and their ranches. They're interested in knowing that they've got a steady supply of labor. And so Wayne took the trouble to write a letter to the Greeley Tribune about why he's supporting this bill. And, Madam President, since he said it better than I could ever say myself, I'd ask that it be included in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Some critics, it will not surprise people around here, are using the same old tired talking points in an effort to delay and kill this bill altogether. But the people of Colorado know better, and the people across this country know better. They know that passing this bill is critical to strengthening our country's borders. It will make us safer and our security, aligning our immigration system with the needs not of a 20th century economy or a 19th century economy, but of the 21st century economy our children are expecting us to build, and honoring our heritage as a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. That's why a growing number of Americans support fixing our broken immigration system, and 70% support a tough but fair pathway to citizenship, and that's what's contained in this bill. So I look forward to working with my colleagues in the days and weeks ahead to find ways we can even improve this bill, and at the end of the day, pass legislation that will make us stronger as a nation and better serve the next generation of Americans and the generation after that. Since our founding, there are a number of things that have made us spectacular as a country, but there are 2 that are hard to find anywhere else. We are a nation that subscribes to the rule of law, and we are a nation of immigrants. With this bill, we reassert both of those principles, and I think we have a golden opportunity to come together again and say that Washington isn't just about playing our own politics, it's about doing the people's business, and that we can show this place can actually work together again to accomplish something very important for all of America. Thank you, Madam President. With that, I thank the senator from South Dakota, and I yield the floor probably considerably later than I should have.
Madam President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Madam President, I also would like to thank the senator from Colorado for his generosity with his time and for giving me the opportunity to make some remarks. I have an amendment that I filed which I don't think we're going to get an opportunity to get pending tonight. I hope that we can get that pending at some point. I hope we can get a number of amendments pending and debated and voted on. That is, after all, what the Senate should be about, and clearly on an issue of this consequence for the American people and for those of us who represent states from all across the country. This is an issue that needs to be debated, which is why many of us voted to get on the bill today. And I think we can all acknowledge that we have an immigration system today that is broken and it needs to be fixed. And as I come to the floor to discuss this particular amendment, I'm reminded that each time Congress has tried to fix our immigration systems, there have been promises and more promises of a more secure border. Unfortunately, Madam President, those promises are never upheld. The bill before us is well intended, but it is following the same path as past immigration bills. Under this bill, it is certain that 12 million undocumented workers will receive legal status soon after the bill is enacted. However, the border security provisions of this bill are nothing more than promises, which, again, may never be upheld. And, Madam President, when I talk to my constituents back in South Dakota, they ask a couple of questions. And the first one is, when will our federal government keep its promises on border security? I think that is first and foremost the issue that most people see when they look at the immigration debate. They want to know why it is that we continue to talk about enforcing the border and securing the border, but we don't follow through on the steps that are necessary to do that. They also ask the second question, why do we need more laws? Why do we need more laws when we're not enforcing the laws that are currently on the books? Well, Madam President, it's time that we follow through on the promises that have been made in the past of a more secure border. The Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996 required 700 miles of reinforced, double-layered fencing along the southern border. This goal was reaffirmed when Congress passed the Secure Fence Act in 2006. To date, less than 40 miles out of the 700 miles of fencing required by law has been completed. My amendment, Amendment 1197, simply requires that we implement current law prior to legalization as an indication that we are serious about border security. As specified by this amendment, 350 miles of the fencing would be required prior to RPI status being granted. The completion of this section of the fence would be a tangible demonstration that this administration is serious about border security. After RPI status is granted, the remaining 350 miles required by current law would have to be constructed during the 10-year period before registered provisional immigrants can apply for green cards. Now, there are a lot of issues associated with this bill. It has a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of things as this debate continues that need to be addressed, and hopefully amendments that will be offered here on the floor that can make this bill stronger, improve it as it goes through the process. But I would say to my colleagues here in the Senate that if we are serious about wanting to show that we get this whole issue of border security, and we're not just talking about it, but actually making real changes to make our border more secure, then this amendment is one way to show it. Because after all, Madam President, I think first and foremost, many of us acknowledge that of the many components and elements of this debate, first and foremost is that we've got to address the issue of border security. It gets talked about. There's a lot of rhetoric surrounding it. There's been a lot of rhetoric here in the United States Senate, as I mentioned earlier, in previous debates on this very subject, and where promises and commitments have been made, promises and commitments that have never been fulfilled with respect to this issue of border security. And so this amendment, Amendment 1197, as I said, is very simple, very straightforward, and only follows through on commitments that have been made by Congress in the past, and which I think the American people expect and frankly have a right to expect that we would follow through on. 350 miles of fence before RPI status is granted, and another 350 miles of fence prior to green card being issued. It's not complicated. And I think in a lot of respects this issue isn't complicated, certainly not complicated in the minds of the American people, who think that first and foremost this is about border security, about border enforcement, about a nation that is able to control its very borders for so many reasons, many of which have been discussed and talked about, and I hope will be talked about even more in the days ahead. And so I don't understand, I don't have the opportunity to get this amendment up and pending to where it can be voted on this evening, Madam President, but I would certainly hope, at least as we get underway in this debate tomorrow, that those of us who have amendments that we think would strengthen and improve this bill will have the opportunity to put them forward and to get them voted on. And so Amendment 1197 is one of those, and I certainly hope that tomorrow the managers of the bill will be able to allow us a pathway where we can get amendments voted on. I think this will improve the bill. I think it strengthens the bill, and it certainly follows through on a commitment that's been made to the American people many times over and has not yet been followed through on. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senate has taken an important and historic step today by adopting a motion to proceed on the legislation reforming our broken immigration system. I look forward to moving through this debate over the next couple of days and weeks in regular order. This bill received a thorough vetting in the Judiciary Committee over a couple of weeks. More than 100 amendments were adopted. I think more than 300 amendments were submitted. And I want to commend Chairman Leahy and Ranking Member Grassley for offering a process that makes this Senate proud. And for those who believe that the Senate can't work through regular order and that all sides can agree to amendments being offered and a debate being had, I think they'd be heartened to see this process so far and to see this bill brought to the floor with the agreement that many amendments will be offered and considered and we'll have thorough debate. Really leaves us in good stead for this legislation. This is important legislation. Now, I hope as we move through it, we can remember that we need and assign motives to people who are debating either side of this issue. This is an issue where passions run high. We see that among our constituents and across the country. But here in the Senate, I hope that we remember that we're all coming to this debate with different perspectives. We represent different states, but that all of us want a better immigration system, and that if we can not question each other's motives throughout this process, I think we'll all be better off. Arizona, as everyone knows, is a state that has a large population of undocumented aliens. We rest on the border, a large border with Mexico, and with all the issues and problems that presents and has over the years. A sizable undocumented population helps no one. It doesn't help those families living day to day with one family member or another out of status. It doesn't help state or local governments that bear the brunt of the cost, whether it's education or health care or criminal justice or incarceration. These are expenses that are borne more by the states than the federal government. And it leads to a lot of frustration, certainly in Arizona and elsewhere. It certainly doesn't help when businesses struggle to maintain a legal workforce. That's the case in Arizona. Up until recently, the Tucson sector of the Border Patrol was the busiest sector in the nation when it comes to illegal crossings. And while there are claims that the border is now safer than ever, landowners in the border region continue to face a reality that would suggest otherwise. Let me just give you an example. Earlier this year, the Ladd Ranch, a 14,000-acre ranch that shares 10 miles of the U.S.-Mexico border between Naco, Arizona, and the San Pedro River, witnessed 14 breaches with a total of 29 trucks just over the past 12 months. These are taking place in the daylight. Between the border and the undocumented, our current immigration system does little to ensure that our economy has the talent we need to ensure the U.S. competes globally. So when you have issues on the border and the landholders and all the problems that are attendant with that, and then you have businesses that simply can't get access to the talent that they need, you have a problem that needs to be solved. In addition, the programs oriented toward providing adequate temporary or short-term workers are typified by caps that don't work and red tape that make them all but unusable. Let's face it, our current immigration system is irreparably broken. This legislation before us takes great strides with border security. I look forward to these provisions being debated and thoroughly vetted throughout this process. I'm sure that many amendments will be offered. I plan to offer some of them myself to improve this process and to improve the border security elements of the bill. This legislation has a tough but a fair process to bring the undocumented out of the shadows. People who come forward will be required to pay fees and fines. For those who raise the term amnesty again and again, let me assure you, there is no amnesty in this legislation. Amnesty, by definition, is an unconditional pardon for a breach of law. This is no unconditional pardon. Those who come forward, come out of the shadows, those who are undocumented, will be required, as I said, to pay fines and fees. They'll be required to work. They'll be required to stay well above the poverty level. When it comes time to renew their status, they'll be required to pay any back taxes that have accrued. And again, show that they have stayed here and have maintained the status in a way that would allow them to be renewed before they're able to adjust to get a green card. 10 years into this process, there will be many other things required as well. Again, they'll need to prove that they have paid taxes, that they have not been a public charge. They will need to learn English. Right now, the requirement is that you learn English to become a citizen. This requirement under this legislation is moved up to green card status. Just to get a green card, you'll have to be proficient in English. This legislation also dramatically modernizes our legal immigration system. It ensures that U.S. businesses will have access to the best and the brightest around the world. I've been concerned about this issue for years. Years ago, I introduced what we called the Staple Act. I'd heard many, many times from businesses that we ought to staple a green card to the diploma of anyone who receives a graduate degree, particularly a Ph.D. in the so-called STEM fields. This legislation accomplishes much of that by simply saying that those who are here, educated in our U.S. universities, will allow to stay here, those with a master's degree or a Ph.D. in the STEM fields, and help create jobs. A big percentage of the jobs created and Fortune 500 companies that are listed were started or created by foreigners, those who were here, who received an education here and were allowed to stay, or by first or second generation immigrants. We need to make sure that those who are going to help us build our economy are allowed to stay, and this legislation does that. We all know that the status quo is unworkable. If you run a business in this country, you are not given currently adequate tools to determine whether those who are presenting themselves for work are here legally or not. This legislation will make sure that those tools are there. I look forward to this process. I look forward to the debate. I think that this debate can represent the Senate at its best, where we can consider this legislation, consider amendments to make sure that the bill is improved, and then send the bill on to the House that can be considered there as well. I want to commend those who've been involved in this process, the so-called Gang of Eight members, my colleagues, the other 7, worked long and hard on this. Our staff worked well into the night, weeks on end, to make sure that we have the legislation before us today. This has been a long, thorough, good process. As I mentioned before, those who have seen the Congress, the House, and the Senate in recent years maybe not reach its full potential, to put it mildly, ought to be heartened by the process on this legislation. And I hope that we can continue it. I look forward to debating it with my colleagues. And, Madam President, I yield the floor. I would note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
Mr. Leader,
I ask unanimous consent the call to quorum be terminated.
without objection.
I now ask that we proceed to pre-morning business and are allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the appointment to the desk be appear separately in the record as if made by the chair.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent when the Senate completes its business day to adjourn until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning, June 12th. Following the prayer and a pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired. The journal proceedings be approved to date. The time for the two leaders. Sorry about that. Be reserved for the use later in the day, and that following any leader remarks, the Senate being a pre-morning business for an hour, senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each during that time. The time would be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees. The majority will control the first half, the Republicans the final half. Finally, the following morning business, the Senate resumed consideration of S. 744.
Objection.
Thank you, Madam President. If there's no further business coming before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
Senate stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you.